because it's going to be our tax system. The possibilities suddenly become infinite. We can identify sectors that we can excel in and really nourish them. And think about, I was talking to John Swinney about the coverage of broadband in Scotland, which is patchy. And really, we all know why. We don't need this business about people driving. There's so many people working at home. And we know that the SMEs, or small medium enterprises, are 99.3% of Scotland's businesses. And 98.3% of them are small, 0 to 49 employees. We've got a fantastic opportunity, and that's going to start spreading the wealth and the focus and the growth right across Scotland. It no longer needs to be congregated in the likes of the Central Belt or London and South East. We can change that. Education system. If you look at what we've got, one of our members he rolled out the MBA programme in Edinburgh University around the world. It's absolutely they think it's excellent. It really is excellent. We continue to have a wonderful name in education. And I've mentioned, we talked about brand a little bit earlier there. This is an interesting stat because Sandy and I were talking about it earlier. Even just daft wee things at the moment, because we are ostensibly a region. If you look at the figures, Copenhagen and Oslo airport passenger numbers in 2013 and how they compare as a total to Glasgow and Edinburgh. So that's sort of 44 million as compared to 16.2. And of course we know that we're doubly whammed because we've got the airport passenger duty. We need to travel to a hub, whether it's London or Amsterdam. We could change that because it really affects our ability, this connectivity or lack of it, to do business internationally. We can change that, and it's part of the government's white paper to try and cut down airport passenger duty or indeed get rid of it altogether, because business and trade, international trade, is vitally important. So fundamentally, to me, this is about choices. I am not selling to you a choice of a wonderful, rosy future that will be brilliant for all time coming. No, of course I'm not. Nor am I selling you a future that's a disaster and it's the end of the world. What I am saying to you is that our decisions and our actions will shape our future. And that is the choice we are making. We are choosing to shape our own future. And you know the best bit? All we need to do is that. How simple could that be? And a bit of this self-belief, a bit of confidence. Thought this was a bit of fun, so I'll just read this because I don't know if you can see it at the back. The relationship between our two countries has never been stronger or more settled, as complex or as important as it is today. Our citizens, uniquely linked by geography and history, are connected today as never before through business, politics, culture and sport, travel and technology, and of course family ties. Our two economies benefit from a flow of people, goods, investment, capital and ideas on a scale that is rare even in this era of global economic integration. We are partners in the European Union and firm supporters of the single market. Guess who that was describing? Ireland and the UK. And what did Ireland do? Oh yes, it voted to become independent. And we can be like that as well. We want to continue trading relationships, we want to continue good partnerships, and that is what we'll do. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
All right, there's someone over there. We're going to take questions now if you would like. If we've got any questions, otherwise
we've got loads of questions.
We've got.
Can I just ask, there's a lot of facts and things here that research work. Why is it our own free press and journalists aren't telling Scottish people a lot of these facts? Because there's a lot of stuff there that I would consider myself really well informed. So that stuff is news to me. And I struggle to the idea that Scottish independent journalists aren't pressing editors and things to publish these things.
Well, you have to ask where the press are, where the press are published from and who owns the press is one of the big problems. You know, the British establishment and the media, the press especially, are against us in this. They have their own agendas, and I think one of the key ones was the pension story in the Express. And you've probably seen the two headlines, one in England, one in Scotland, And in Scotland, the pensions were going to be a disaster if we voted for independence, and in the English ones, they were going to be a disaster anyway. So, but they wanted to just emphasise, it was going to be all our fault if we voted yes. But Michelle, you can,
yeah. I mean that's actually a statement of fact. And there is information on the internet which I can point you to. One of the websites tracked where all the papers were owned, and they invariably, I mean, we don't actually have a Scottish press beyond the kind of Courier, who's pretty much nailed its colours to the mast the other day, and the P&J. We don't really have a Scottish press. They're owned either overseas, but they're kind of headquartered, if you like, in terms of the editorial thinking and shaping out of London. And of course they're very much against it. To be honest, you won't find accurate information there. Possibly the Sunday Herald that recently came out and declared for yes, but I think most people find this sort of slightly dry. It's probably better when somebody's kind of talking to it rather than just reading tables. But probably more information and more realistic information is available on the internet. And Business for Scotland, I genuinely believe, is quite a good resource in terms of the articles. And we tend to say, if we make an assertion, we tend to say, this is why we've made this assertion, this is where we've sourced the figures from. So it's a useful resource.
One of the best ways of countering the press is the social media, and there's a lot of really good websites where you can get information, especially the Business for Scotland one. It's got hundreds of articles written with facts and figures in them, if you like to have a look at that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of what ifs and if only was mentioned in your panel of speakers and everything that was up there. If Scotland comes out of Westminster, we're going into Europe.
We are in Europe and will continue to be in Europe.
Going into Europe. What happens, what if UKIP have a strong vote this month? What's that going to say to Scotland or to us if UKIP are going to be strong in it? I mean, the legislation coming for Europe is that any new countries joining will be 80% governed by Brussels. We'll not be nothing like Norway. We'll be another member of states joining Europe. We will be using the euro because that is the state, that is what the Europe is, that is what Brussels is saying. Any new company will use the euro. A lot more rules and regulations coming out of Brussels that we're going to have to adopt. It won't be Scotland out there as an independent, will be part of the union. Not Westminster, but a European Union.
So, which we're already part of, obviously.
But, as I said, what if UKIP have a stronger vote?
There's three questions here, right? Do I think it's likely that UKIP will do well on Thursday? Regrettably, it is. I don't think they will in Scotland. I don't think there's the appetite for that. And
But what if?
Right,
I'm only asking, what if?
What if? In other words, it makes it to me more likely, if there were a no vote, that Scotland would be dragged out of Europe against its will, because generally speaking, Scotland is in favour of Europe and the trading opportunities. So the second thing you mentioned was that Scotland would be forced to use the euro. That's not factually correct. So for a country to adopt the euro, there's a stage process that they need to go through. First of all, they need to have their own currency. So Scotland would need to launch its own bespoke currency and run with that for a few years. And this is just a statement of the process. The second thing they would need to do is to track ERM2 for a period of 2 years. Thirdly, the thing they would have to do is to meet the convergence criteria that are set out by the EU, which incidentally we would fail in at the moment because of the debt and deficit thresholds we have. So that would be some way off. So that's not going to happen immediately. And the third question in terms of extent of control out of Europe, it isn't 80%, countries, and indeed even federal states, say for example within Germany, have currently vast more control over their tax take than Scotland does. It's certainly nowhere near that extent. And you need to think, yes, so you are correct, by being a member of Europe, every country is ceding a level of sovereignty in return for access to international trading. Every country's doing that. Germany's doing that. You wouldn't say Germany's not independent. Every country's choosing to do that, and it's on balance, all things considered. My personal belief is we get more out of Europe, and it's worth that trade-off, because there's only really now one truly independent country, and that's North Korea. And certainly not in this, we're not proposing North Korea. There's a level of interconnectedness, which is, of course, that last slide kind of stated as well. We all want to trade together. Trade's absolutely essential.
We want to trade with Europe, but we don't want the legislation that's coming. Well, I personally don't want the legislation that's coming out of Europe, and I think it's just getting too heavy-handed. And we are going into Europe, and as I say, I think that UKIP will have a stronger vote across Britain, across anywhere, and I think that's going to rattle up a lot of cages, because we are sick. I'm sick to the buck teeth. I'm a small businessman in the area. I'm sick to the buck teeth of this new legislation.
Europe's certainly not perfect. It's certainly not perfect.
Neither's Great Britain.
Yeah.
Neither's Great Britain. I would like to see a stronger voice in Holyrood. A much stronger voice in Holyrood.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we sometimes touch on this. Is anyone interested in some facts around enhanced devolution? So, an interesting fact we calculated in Business for Scotland, because you could say, and you sometimes hear people saying that, why don't we just hold on and wait for enhanced powers in Holyrood? Based on, so there's about 7% of the tax take raised in Scotland that Holyrood currently has control over. With the Scotland Act, which will complete its final implementation next year in 2016, that rises to about 15%. In other words, 85% of our tax take is still, the decisions around that are made by Westminster. So then we played a wee game and said, right, okay, that's roughly, it's about 1% a year, because the Calman Commission was set up in 2007, will deliver in 2016. Roughly about, so if we extrapolate that forward, how long would it take us to get to full fiscal autonomy under a kind of devolution package? And the figure came back. Does anyone know where it is? You'll never guess. I mean, even I was shocked. 170 years. So if you can afford to wait 170 years for the snail's pace of devolution, like was talked yesterday from Clegg about capital gains tax, in fact today, inheritance tax, if you look at the percentage of tax take, it is tiny relative. And here's another, I've got a long list here, which I hope you don't mind me boring you with, but it's one of my all-time favourite lists of them. And I can't remember it because it's such a long list. But just to give you an idea of, here we are, right, see, here's the kind of additional tax take that we would have in an independent Scotland. Now that's assuming that we're in Europe and we have a currency union, okay? So this is a tax take at the moment which goes to Westminster. So VAT, national insurance, our geographic share of oil and gas, corporation tax, fuel duties, inheritance tax, tobacco duties, interest and dividends, alcohol duties, vehicle excise duty, capital gains tax, insurance premium tax, airport passenger duty, betting and gaming duties, Crown estate income, which is incidentally worth a fortune, and would be able to issue government bonds. That is not insignificant. That is not insignificant. All that tax currently goes to Westminster.
But if we had a stronger voice, it would go back into Scotland.
A stronger voice where?
In Holyrood.
And how likely do you think that is? Do you genuinely see an appetite for that?
For having a stronger voice in Scotland?
For increased powers at Holyrood? Do you really believe that's going to happen? So if you could outline specifically the proposals that are on the table, because what we've had so far is what's called Devo Nano from the Labour Party, and it was that made us work out these figures. So from a control perspective, why on earth would Westminster give up all the money from that tax take?
And do you think Europe's not going to take that from us either?
No, of course it's not.
Why not?
Because they're not in charge of that.
We're going into Europe, they're going to be...
So this is really about Europe for you, it's not really about Scotland at all, I take it.
You've covered many, many instances there. I mean, I'm picking on Europe just now because I would really like to back off of Europe.
Yeah.
Trade with them, but back off for Europe. So you've covered many, many things there. I mean, we're negotiating...
But doesn't Scotland, if Scotland stays with the United Kingdom and UKIP wins and there is a decision to move in the vote we're supposedly going to have within the United Kingdom about staying in Europe or leaving Europe, let's say, what if, as you're playing that game, what if the United Kingdom says, let's leave Europe? We leave Europe, we as an independent, we as a Scotland, as part of the United Kingdom, are going to be probably significantly worse off than still being, even if we're independent, at least within that game, we still have an opportunity to play our own game. And if you look at the facts within Europe as it stands at the moment, and this is a real example, and Stephen will probably be able to help me on this, but Richard Lochhead did succeed last week in getting the area-based payments on agriculture through Owen Paterson back from Europe. But we only do it through the generosity of Owen Paterson. We have no right to any seat for agriculture, a massive part of our economy, or fisheries. We have no right to go to Europe for any discussions whatsoever relating to that. It's purely and simply through the generosity of Owen Paterson. Now, irrespective of whether we come out of Europe, we in Scotland still need to have the ability to go to whatever table it might be, separately to what the southeast of England is demanding. Now, if I was a politician in Westminster, I'd be looking at what the southeast of England want, because that's where my vote comes from. That's where all the population is. I don't give a shit about you lot up north, frankly. But at least if we were independent from that, whether we're in Europe or out of Europe, whatever we are, if we're independent, we can make that decision ourselves. And what I really find so alarming about all of these meetings is the lack of faith that we or anyone else has in our own ability as Scots to manage our own economy and our own country. It doesn't matter if that's in Europe. Why do we need pound? Why do we need the euro? We can work these things through ourselves. We're big grown-up people. The country isn't going to disappear tomorrow because we're independent. Houses aren't going to become valueless. Anyone who says I want to leave,
well, the fundamentals are there from
That's not part of our policy, Peter. Just in case anyone...
Have we got any more questions?
I'm from Germany, and I live here, and I cannot agree more to what
You're calling shorthand.
Thank you very much. And just on a joking side, some years ago we saw a soccer game, England against Germany, in a Scottish pub in Birkhead. And it was a home game for me. Everyone was shouting for Germany, so it sometimes seems like we are in Scotland closer to Germany.
That's a true European culture.
To some extent that worries me too, because I do not want this to be won by an anti-English vote.
Sure.
I want this to be won by a pro-devolution, a pro-independence, a pro-belief in ourselves. And what really worries me is I get this thrown at me by English friends all the time. But when we watch Scotland play, whoever, we support Scotland. Well, good on you, thanks very much. But I wouldn't expect New Zealand to support Australia if they were playing South Africa, or Australia to support the other way around. Why? I want to see a good game of football between England and England. But I'm Scottish. I don't support England.
But I agree with you. Coming from a different country and settling here and speaking to lots of people and making ideas known and proposals and concepts. What seems to come very regularly back is like, oh no, we can't do that, and this is not possible, and no, we're too small for that, and oh, we've tried this for 30 years and it doesn't work, and this kind of let's go, we can do it attitude is missing very often. And my question really is, not that I'm terribly well informed in what's happening in the campaign, but my question is, isn't there a possibility to mobilize some very, very famous people, Scottish people like Sean Connery or people like that, to get that a little bit more going and support the Yes campaign?
I mean, so that kind of happens.
Because there seems to be either inspiration or fear, these are the two.
I mean, fear is, and we know that the No campaign's kind of internal name for themselves is Project Fear, and that their strategy is to constant kind of pick, oh, sort of thing. I mean, yeah, I know the Yes campaign every so often releases kind of names. Sean Connery's not ideal because he doesn't live here, and they're trying to really genuinely have a values-based thing. So, for example, the Yes campaign doesn't take money from people unless they're registered to vote here in Scotland, unlike the No campaign that takes a lot of money from wealthy donors based down south. So yes, but ultimately this is a culture shift. I remember as a child, I literally was told as a child that Scotland was too wee, too poor and too stupid. I was told that routinely, and the worst of it all was by my fellow Scots, who were being told by the newspapers of those facts at the very same time that these statistics about more money being raised happening year on year on year. And to do that kind of culture shift, because what you're actually asking someone to believe is, do you mean that the whole oxygen of the entire state has been lying to me all of my adult life? And guess what, guys? The whole oxygen of the state has been lying to you for most of your adult life. But that's quite an unpalatable and difficult thing for a lot of people to believe. So it is a culture shift, and it is engendered by confidence. Because just imagine what we could do, look at what we're doing the way we are, just imagine how much more we could do. It'd be just fantastic.
Coming back again to the question that you raised about Europe, surely it's better for us to be able to make that decision as to whether we're going to be in or out of Europe. Not Westminster, not UKIP, not Nigel Farage and the Ukrainians or the Romanians or whoever else.
Are we going to be able to keep the pound?
Yes.
No,
Is that sure?
no,
I'm sure. But listen, you know what? I'm not yet in government saying that. No, and I'm not
Because
about to be.
I don't like the euro.
that's one
Right.
of the statistics are going into Euro that we've all have to adopt.
Well, that's what I'm saying. She says yes. Everybody else seems to say no.
So let's.
Public defence.
All
Are
right.
we going to lose RAF Lossiemouth?
Yes,
We've already lost Kinloss.
and
No.
the South.
Pardon?
No.
Well,
No.
they're nuclear based.
No.
The Euro
So
fighter is
which
usually
question do we
nuclear
want
based.
to do first? Do we want to do the pound, the euro, or defence?
In Moray, the following.
Right. So.
The MOD put into RAF Lossiemouth.
Right.
I think defence. Sorry,
Yeah,
Michelle.
no,
Like,
yeah,
have a
go
rest.
on.
Have a rest. I think defence is one of the best examples you can bring up of how we can run our country a lot better than it's been run at the moment. We don't have any maritime patrol vessels looking after our oil rigs. We don't have any Nimrods for surveillance. Granted, you and I could run our defence better than it's been run at the moment. We're building aircraft carriers. Well, maybe. We're building aircraft carriers here in the UK that we don't have any aircraft to land on them. We've built Nimrods and we've scrapped them before they were actually commissioned to run. The only aircraft we have are Typhoons, and there's about 10 of them at the moment. It's crazy. Ireland have a patrol vessels going around their coast, so do Denmark and Norway. When the Admiral Kuznetsov came into the Moray Firth to shelter from a storm, the MOD found out about it by Twitter, and they had to phone up someone locally to go and have a look out the window to see if it was actually there, and then they sent a boat up from Portsmouth. It took a day and a half to get there. You know, what kind of defence is that we've got at the moment? We can't. You and me couldn't do worse than that. You know, we spend all this money on nuclear weapons. They're controlled by the Americans. We can't press the button unless Americans say, yeah, it's okay to press the button. So they're totally useless to us. It costs us $100 billion to replace, the lifetime cost to replace Trident, and that's what the proposal is at the moment. I just want Scotland to be a peaceful, small, trading country, doing our best and
With
trade.
no defence.
And
No, with
Putin comes over for his holidays.
Well, he hasn't got time
No.
to come to us.
So
our
remember, sorry, but the figures at the moment, the way Scotland's kind of balance sheet works is that Westminster decides that a certain percentage of defence money is spent on behalf of Scotland, and that's £3.3 billion per annum. Only £1.9 billion is actually spent in Scotland. Okay, so there's a significant difference between those two numbers. The Scottish Government has costed, as part of the White Paper, a defence force similar to that of Denmark and other equivalent-sized countries at $2.5 billion. In other words, that's a saving from the 3.3 down to the 2.5 billion. Okay, so in other words, you can spend less, and they've talked about, I think it's 15,000 regular soldiers, 5,000 reservists, 12 Typhoons based out of Lossie. And to me, it's about the targeted defence. I mean, Sandy's example is excellent. We don't actually have the defence we need. We have a whole load of stuff we don't need. We don't need nuclear weapons that we know we can't do anything with, because when we press a button we're all dead anyway. We cannot actually defend our coastline. It's actually vitally important to us. So we can do a better job with less money.
But even if the UK got attacked, we can't defend ourselves against Putin anyway. People say if we're independent, we can't defend ourselves. The UK couldn't defend itself against Russia or anything like that anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that to my mind the needs of defence have changed.
We don't seem to be giving ourselves enough faith in ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the millions or billions that are potentially spent on nuclear in the south. Not on the south, sorry, on Glasgow. That holy art, that money, potentially, instead of paying it to Westminster to come back up there, we would have it ourselves, and we could prioritise it wherever we liked. And if we felt like prioritising it and giving everyone, I don't know, free condoms, we could give everyone free condoms.
Well, it's 500 million a year, so that's a
whatever
lot
else
of
we
condoms.
wanted to.
Condoms.
That would be our job, our priority, our money to spend how we wanted. And that's what I think. We need to have more faith in ourselves. And one of the first things I would do, having seen your map, is I would manage to make sure that people in Lewis live beyond 70 to 74 years old. Because you've got the lowest life expectancy in Scotland.
Well, there's actually a place in Glasgow that the life expectancy of women is 48. It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
48 years old and we're 14th richest country in the
Do you
world.
think you get the money to improve that? Boys doing this, Andy?
Yeah, no
They're
problem.
still there.
I'll sort them out. I'll send you there down with a digger.
Pardon?
Could I come back to Ian's point about Europe, that you can keep me right here, but presently I think we get 3 MEPs, but in an independent Scotland we get 9.
No, we've got 6, and it's estimated to be 12 to 13. I mean, that would need to be agreed, but roughly on equivalent sized countries it's 12 to 13, so we've got 6.
Because I think at the moment the likes of Richard Lockhead, who represents us there, he doesn't actually negotiate himself, he doesn't get to directly.
He doesn't get into the
That's
room,
my
can
point.
he?
He has to do it with the generosity of Owen Patterson.
Yeah.
Can I just come in a wee bit, because this guy here,
That's Pedro.
Pedro, sorry.
Pedro the fisherman.
There's a lot of my friends' husbands are saying the exact same thing. They're nae for Hain independence, they're quite for it. But they're the same, they didn't want to be in Europe. But they are voting yes because they see it as that's the SNP that wants to go into Europe. And there's other parties that's going to come in. Labour, I heard Jim Siller saying that he did not want to do that. He wanted to go down the road like Norway and Switzerland.
You wouldn't be like Norway, where it's £40 for a bottle of whiskey and £25 for a box of chocolate.
But their wages are higher.
It's all relative, though,
again,
isn't it?
So,
If you're getting paid 200 grand a week, do you think you'd notice that? You know?
I'm quite happy with tenner for a bottle of whiskey in the supermarket. Why do I want to go and
Well,
change?
the simple
And then we've got a
question is,
government
would you
that's
like to
trying
be
to put the
wealthier
price
or
of
would
the
you
whiskey
prefer
up
to be
here as it is
poorer?
anyhow.
Would you like to be wealthier or poorer? I mean, that's it.
Well,
Yeah, actually that's an excellent point, thank you. And it goes back to this thing about democracy. What's happened consistently with Scotland is that we have voted one way. At the moment, in Westminster, you hear this phrase, best of all worlds. We have the worst of all possible worlds. We have very little representation in Westminster. We cannot affect change. Even if every single man, woman and child entitled to vote votes one way, it makes no difference. And we have relatively little control via Holyrood. We have the worst of all possible worlds. That's vital. The point about democracy, you're right. So the white paper, it's currently the SNP government's white paper. The point for me is, I almost don't get too worked up about that. We choose. We make decisions, and the democratic will of the Scottish people makes them. That fundamentally would be radically different because it doesn't happen at the moment.
Vote right, folks.
Lady with the blonde hair, back.
Talk the goodwill of Owen Patterson. Owen Patterson speaks for England, and he proved that just a few weeks ago when he was talking about GM crops at the EU. Now, the 4 countries that make up the UK Ireland didn't want GM crops, Wales didn't want GM crops, Scotland didn't want GM crops. England did. They spoke, the Welsh and the Scottish, the representatives, spoke to Owen Patterson before he went into that meeting and said, will you please put our point of view across? Since we can't speak for ourselves, you're the spokesman for the UK, please tell them that Wales and Scotland don't support GM crops.
That's
He
exactly
went
my point.
in and he said,
Yeah.
I support GM crops, I'm the UK representative, I support GM crops, and he was actually promoting GM crops. When he came back to Holyrood to answer the question, why didn't we put our viewpoint forward? Oops, I took the wrong notes then. Sorry. You cannot rely on a spokesman from the UK to speak on behalf of the whole of the UK, because they only speak on behalf of England.
But that's exactly my point. The only route at the moment that we in Scotland have is through Richard Lockhead persuading Owen Patterson to take our message to Europe.
But it doesn't.
But no, I know. And what I want is I want Richard Lockhead to have the right to go and have a voice in Europe, which at the moment he doesn't. He has no voice. He depends. He is absolutely
We
dependent.
can't speak for ourselves, and we have to rely on saying to Owen Patterson.
That's exactly what I was saying. So
Yeah, I think you're both right.
We're both on the same side here.
Another thing that happened was Alex Salmond had mentioned the fact that sometimes when it was the turn of somebody from the UK to speak in Brussels at a meeting, what happens if that particular spokesman can't turn up? Could, for example, the fact that we take in over 60% of the fishing into Scotland, 6% of the UK fishing comes into Scotland, could we have our man from Holyrood chair the meeting in place of somebody from the UK if the person from the UK can't make it? The answer was no. We will have a civil servant from the UK chairing the meeting, because we cannot rely on somebody from a devolved parliament being on site. And that came from somebody in Westminster. They can't rely on somebody from the devolved parliament speaking on site.
but that's tremendous.
That is downright insulting.
I mean, I think that's the whole issue about the EU debate, is the fact that we're not being represented properly within the EU. There's lots of examples of how Scotland could have got money, and our representative on the EU turned down these offers. One was to do with food banks, which I found out about a few weeks ago. And I think that is the argument when everybody's going on about EU, are we better off? It's a hard thing to answer because we're not represented properly. We haven't yet got our full potential out of Europe, and I think we need to give ourselves a chance to do that. And the other thing I wanted to just comment on was this inequality, and I feel very strongly about that. Hopefully you got that from my presentation. We're talking about age and people living in Ireland, or people living in Glasgow. If we continue, it's another reason I definitely vote yes, if we continue within the Union, that will only get worse because of the welfare benefits cuts, because of the changes and the austerity measures, which is creating huge inequalities in our society.
Statistically, in Scotland, 1 in 4 work for the government. With benefits, 1 in 3 are claiming off the system. What would you suggest in an independent Scotland? How can you see that being sustainable?
I don't understand your question. Could you repeat it? What do you mean by 1 in 4?
1 in 4 work for the government, or for...
In terms of...
well,
They're not making any money.
There's less people work for the government in Scotland than there is in the whole of the UK.
There's 1 in 4 work for the government,
which is
of
less
some kind. Nurses,
Public
police,
sector, you mean?
So they cost
public
us.
sector.
And the rest are
which is less than the whole of the UK as a whole. The percentage is less. It was on one of Michelle's slides.
I mean, remember, to me, this is not about taking control, putting it down in Edinburgh and then carrying on exactly the same policies. I sometimes use the example with people, when did we